Hey, welcome to Made by Mitch. This is often referred to as a cookie. It's basically a slice of a tree. If you've ever worked with a cookie or any kind of rough cut lumber, sometimes it can be hard to flatten, especially if you don't have a planer. So that's why I made this. This is a router flattening jig. And today, I'm going to show you how I made it. So this project only took me about an hour to do. A really simple project, and you can use materials you have just around the shop. I just used some scrap materials, 1/2-inch plywood and a small piece of 2x4. So the first thing I did was figure out how long I needed my jig to be, and then I cut my 2x4 to that length, and then I ripped it in half. And so what I'm doing here is I'm cutting off one side of the rounded edge, and then I'm cutting the other two pieces to 1.5 inches wide. And then I ripped one of those in half as well. You'll see what I'm doing with this here as we go along, but this is what I did to get my 2x4 ready to go. Next thing I had to do was get the 1/2-inch plywood ready to go. And this looks like I'm cutting it at an angle, but I'm actually cutting off an angle to make it square. And once I got my length, I just used the router to measure where I needed it to fit on this piece of plywood. Next, I just had to rip the plywood to width. So after I got my plywood ready to go, I had to make a groove that the router bit would lay in. So what I did was I made 3 lines. The first one was the center mark, and then I measured a 1/2 inch above that center mark and a 1/2 inch below that center mark to make an inch wide groove that the router bit would be in. So then what I did was I used a 1-inch Forstner bit to drill on each side of this groove that I was drilling. That way I could go in with a jigsaw, and I put a piece of plywood under this so that way there wouldn't be any tear out, and it worked great. So after I got these holes cut out, I clamped my board onto my workbench and then cut this out with a jigsaw. And then after that, I could go ahead and add the side rails that the router would go in between. And this is where, at the beginning when I ripped that 2x4 up, this is where I used those 1.5 inch half pieces to go in here. And I glued these and then used a staple gun to fasten it together. So I needed some end caps for my jig, and so I decided to go ahead and rip up another 2x4, cut it into a couple pieces, and then I added it to the bottom. You can see it there. I forgot to get footage of it, but this didn't work because it didn't allow me to go wide enough to flatten what I needed to flatten. So I went back to the drawing board and just got a scrap piece of 1x4, just a furring strip, and I sliced that up to see if that would work. And so I ended up just gluing this onto the end of my jig, and then I also used the staple gun to fasten that a little bit more securely, and then that worked great. Now I know this isn't super fancy or really intricate, but I just needed a quick jig to get one of my projects moving along, and so I made it just to fit this cookie that I'm flattening here now. What I did was I clamped a 2x4 on each end, I made sure it was level, and then I just went to town with this router, and it did a great job. I did learn a few things along the way, especially with flattening something with a router like this, and I will have a later video on this actual project and flattening process. But this is kind of what it does, and you can see it there, how it flattens one side of it and keeps the other stuff without flattening. So it's really neat how it works, and it does make a mess, so be prepared for that. Well, that's it for this build. Thank you so much for watching this video. If it's your first time watching one of my videos, I just want to say thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing. I try to put out videos like this as often as I can, and my whole goal as a channel is just to show you my journey of learning. As I learn things, I'm putting it out there for you. Hopefully it will help you. Hopefully it will inspire you to go and make things and do things that you want to do.
feel free to leave me a comment or some feedback down below of what you thought of this video. And then also, if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Made by Mitch. But thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.